He wasn't supposed to see it, a billionaire father, hidden in a corner of a crowded event, watching a moment no one else had noticed, his disabled son, struggling to take just one step, until a young black waitress knelt beside him. What happened next wasn't planned, rehearsed, or expected. It was a moment so small the world would have ignored it, but it shook a man whose life was built on power, privilege, and distance. Because, in that instant, he witnessed something he couldn't buy, control, or look away from. But why did one brave dance step change everything? And what truth was he finally forced to confront? It had started as just another charity gala, with glittering lights and polished floors, a sea of people moving with cold confidence, the belief that the world bent for them. Among them was Daniel Mercer, a billionaire whose name opened doors before he reached them. His life was scheduled, cushioned, and controlled. Every event scheduled, every interaction filtered, every emotion hidden behind the armor of success. But the one part of his life he couldn't schedule, couldn't fix, and couldn't ignore was his son, Evan. Born with a condition that made movement difficult, Evan's world was slower, quieter, and often painful. And Daniel loved him deeply. The love didn't wipe away the guilt he carried, the guilt for being absent, the guilt for not understanding, the guilt for not knowing how to reach him. Evan sat in the gala, poised in his chair, eyes on the glowing dance floor he had never joined. People passed by him with consolatory smiles, the kind that looked kind but kept their distance. In the most packed rooms of gilded wealth, exclusion seemed to find a way. Daniel noticed it all, but told himself this was normal. This was life. This was how things were. Until a small accident, a dropped tray, a flurry of motion, and a young black waitress kneeling beside Evan shifted everything. There was something about the way she looked at his son, not with pity or fear, but with recognition. As if she saw someone the world had always overlooked. As if she understood something Daniel never had. And in that moment, right before anything truly happened, Daniel felt it. The quiet pull of a moment that was about to change everything. He didn't know how. Not yet. The night, though, was no longer ordinary. It was something else. An occasion he wasn't ready for. The music swelled through the ballroom as Daniel watched the waitress right herself, her hands shaking for a moment longer as she struggled to compose herself. Guests did look at her, just as they usually did. Looked, yet barely saw. Brief, cold, dismissive, visible for just that small second necessary to judge her before forgetting. But Evan looked longer than anyone else. She noticed him too. When she came toward his chair again, not as a waitress, but as a person, the shift was nuanced, yet undeniably there. She didn't look at him with the patronizing softness most adults used around disabled children. She sank slowly to her knees, matching his height, making sure he knew she wasn't above him. Not here, not in this moment. And that's when something in Evan's body shifted. A tiny spark, a flicker of wanting. His foot tapped, barely, but enough for her to understand. She extended her hand, not pushing him, just offering a bridge. Daniel's chest tightened. Evan rarely responded to strangers, rarely trusted anyone, rarely tried to move unless coaxed by therapists or the familiar routine of home. But here he was, lifting his hand toward a woman he'd met seconds ago. Guests noticed it too, but not with wonder. Whispers started first, quiet, slicing, judgmental. People shifted uncomfortably, as if the sight of a disabled child reaching for a dance step was something disruptive, something out of place amongst glittering gowns and curated perfection. And when they saw who was guiding him, those whispers darkened. A black waitress. Eyes narrowed. Smirks formed. Some guests shook their heads, as if the simple kindness she offered was an act of audacity. A few stared at Daniel, waiting for him to stop it, to pull his son away, to restore order. After all, men like him weren't supposed to let staff, especially staff like her, step beyond their place. Daniel felt those eyes, felt the pressure, felt the unspoken expectations that had ruled his life for years. But he couldn't move. Part of him knew this moment was bigger than the people watching, bigger than their ignorance or their quiet prejudice. Evan placed his shaking hand in hers, She braced his weight against her lightly, as if letting him feel the strength was his own. Together they took a step, small and fragile, unbalanced but undeniably a step, and then another. The room froze. It was the look on his face that got him. Fear, effort, hope, and pride all tangled together. The kind of emotion Daniel had been longing to see for years. But the tension in the room grew heavier. Again, several guests whispered, none of them even trying to hide their irritation. They complained under their breath about the disruption, about her closeness, about how unprofessional it looked. Some shifted away, as if kindness were contagious and unwelcome. One woman shook her head in open disgust, mumbling something that, even though he had not heard it, made Daniel's stomach drop. A quiet insult meant to demean the waitress, dismiss her worth, and reduce her entire existence to a stereotype she didn't deserve. The moment should have been pure, beautiful, even. Instead, it became a mirror reflecting a truth Daniel had spent years refusing to see. His world was built on barriers, racial, economic, social, and he'd stood on the safe side of them without ever questioning the cost. Evan tried another step. His legs shook, but he didn't let go. The waitress steadied him again, her face calm, patient, determined. But just as a small crowd gathered, just as Evan seemed ready to take a third step, something had happened in the room that would turn this fragile moment into a storm Daniel could no longer ignore. And nothing that followed would leave his life unchanged. It happened so fast, even the music seemed to choke in the air. 1 minute Evan was raising his foot for a further step, supported gently by the waitress, and the next, a sharply dressed guest stormed toward them, his features contorted with annoyance. He did not see Evan's bravery. He did not see the fragile progress. All he saw was a black woman touching a billionaire's son, guiding him, visible in a way he didn't think she deserved to be. He reached out, not gently, not cautiously, and yanked her arm from Evan. She fell. Evan lost his balance, his body falling downwards, knees buckling as the strength he struggled so hard to gather slipped from underneath him. The shock in his face was instantaneous. Then came the fear. Daniel's breath tore from his lungs. The room was filled with gasps, yet nobody acted in her favor. No one asked her if she was hurt. On the contrary, the guest reprimanded her with the coldness of a person who believed he was protecting the proper order of the place. She didn't belong in their space. She didn't belong near their children. She didn't belong, period, in any way. Daniel felt the words hit him like a physical blow. He watched as his son shook on the floor, tears gathering and welling up but refusing to fall. He watched the waitress steady herself, a flicker of pain crossing her face as she tried to reach for Evan again, the same man stepping between them once more. And he watched the people around them turn a blind eye, as if not to see the cruelty playing out right in front of them. And then Daniel saw something he'd never seen before. His son reaching not for him, but for her, his hand lifted, shaking, desperate, calling for the only person who had seen him, not as a burden, not as a tragic figure, but as a child who wanted to try. In that frozen moment, Daniel realized something brutal and undeniable. The real danger to his son wasn't his disability. It was the world he had raised him in. The room waited, silent, watching Daniel. And with the full weight of privilege, fear, and truth bearing down on him, he knew he had only seconds to decide what kind of father and what kind of man he was going to be. Impact. Daniel moved before anyone else did. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of something far deeper, clarity. He knelt beside his son, lifting him gently, shielding him with a tenderness the room had never seen from him. Then he turned to the waitress, offering his hand not as a billionaire, not as a benefactor, but as a human being acknowledging another human being's dignity. The room sat in stunned silence. For once, wealth didn't command attention. Decency did. He thanked her, not with a polite nod, but filled with the weight of a man who only then knew what he had let silence cost. He saw in her eyes the fatigue, the years of being belittled, judged, and pushed aside. He saw the strength she had carried in a world that kept trying to shrink her. As security escorted the man who had shoved her out, Daniel made sure she remained standing at his side, visible, respected, and unbroken. But the real change came later, when the music started again and everybody in the audience played the incident off like it never happened. Daniel didn't return to his table. He walked onto the empty dance floor with his son and the waitress. And there, under the lights, Evan took another step unsteadily, shaking but determined. This time, both of them supported him. A father finally learning, and a woman who had shown him the truth. That night did not fix the world. It did not erase prejudice stitched into the room or into a society that still judged worth by skin and status and silence. But it did do something important. It woke up a man who had benefited from the system without ever seeing its harm. Because sometimes, change comes with one of those moments which you cannot ignore. A moment that forces you to confront what you've allowed to continue. So the question is, if one brave step can open a man's eyes, how many more moments like that do we pass every day and never take the time to see?